The air still tastes of that Texas summer, even now, nearly 3 decades later. A sweetness laced with the metallic tang of unspoken dread. It clings to me, a phantom limb of a life that was stolen before it truly began. My name is Celeste. I was born under a scorching August sun in 1980 into a quiet life in rural Texas, a landscape of endless fields and sky so vast it swallowed dreams whole. My parents, Silas and Beatrix, were pillars of our tight-knit community, their lives woven into the fabric of our church and the rhythm of the seasons. Dad, a mechanic with hands perpetually stained with grease, possessed a quiet strength, his wisdom often conveyed in a nod or a knowing glance. Mom, a seamstress whose needles danced with tireless grace, was the embodiment of gentle resilience, her faith a shield against the world's harsh edges. In 1996, I was 15, on the cusp of 16, navigating that awkward, thrilling space between girlhood and whatever lay beyond. My days were a predictable loop. School, then a stop at the Countryside Emporium, the local market that smelled of ripe peaches and sawdust. It was there, amidst the neatly stacked cans of green beans and the vibrant produce, that I'd often see him. Mr. Arris. He was 33, a man who blended into the background like a shadow. He worked, he'd mentioned, as an actuary for some insurance firm in the next town over, though he lived a good 20 miles out, on a sprawling property I imagined was just as unremarkable as he seemed. He was married, I'd heard through the low hum of small-town gossip, but had no children. At 15, that detail registered, but held no real weight. He started subtly, with polite, almost shy nods. Then came the brief, unremarkable pleasantries about the weather, or the price of butter. He had a quiet way about him, a gentle cadence to his voice that made you lean in to catch his words. Soon he was asking about my day, about school, about the books I was reading. He listened with an intensity that was flattering, making me feel seen in a way no one else truly had. My parents, for all their love, were busy, their attention often diverted by the demands of our faith and community. Mr. Arris's words were always soft, comforting, like the first cool breeze after a stifling summer day. He never rushed me, never pressed, just slowly, almost imperceptibly, wove himself into the mundane tapestry of my weekly routine. Then came the invitation. It was a few weeks before my 16th birthday, a day I'd been anticipating with that unique blend of teenage excitement and trepidation. He found me in the baking aisle, his eyes, usually so unassuming, holding a glint I couldn't quite decipher. "Celeste," he began, his voice a low, almost conspiratorial murmur. "You mentioned your birthday is approaching. I was wondering if you'd allow me to celebrate it with you. Just a small, private dinner. A little something to mark the occasion." My heart did a peculiar flutter. No one had ever offered to celebrate my birthday like that. My parents, devout and traditional, favored quiet, family-centric gatherings. This felt grown-up, exciting. I hesitated for only a fraction of a second, a tiny shiver of unease quickly buried beneath a wave of flattered curiosity. "Oh, Mr. Arris," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. That's very kind of you." He assured me it would be nothing grand, just a quiet dinner. He'd pick me up, he said, and we'd go somewhere nice. The thought of it filled me with a giddy anticipation I hadn't felt before. My parents, I reasoned, didn't need to know every single detail. It was just a birthday, after all. A simple dinner. The night of my supposed birthday celebration. He picked me up in a car I hadn't seen before, a sleek, dark sedan that seemed to hum with a quiet power. He was dressed impeccably, and for the first time I saw him not just as Mr. Arris from the market, but as a man who exuded an air of quiet sophistication, almost a subtle danger. He didn't take me to a restaurant, though. Instead, we drove further than I expected, pulling up to a motel I vaguely recognized from passing by on the main highway, a place that always seemed shrouded in a perpetual twilight. My unease resurfaced, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "A motel?" I asked, my voice a little shaky, a tremor I hoped he didn't notice. He smiled, that same gentle smile, but it felt different now, a little too knowing, a predatory edge I couldn't quite name. "Just for a quiet evening, Celeste," he reassured me, his hand resting lightly on my arm as he opened the car door. His touch felt heavy, lingering. a little more private, more special. Inside, the air was thick with a scent I couldn't place, a cloying mixture of stale cigarette smoke, cheap cleaning solution, and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tight, and a small, half-eaten cake sat on a wobbly table by the window. He offered me a slice, his movements smooth, practiced, almost hypnotizing. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching myself in a dream, a silent observer to my own unfolding nightmare. The details of that night are a blur, shrouded in a fog of confusion and a growing sense of dread. There was a quietness to him, a deliberate slowness in his actions that felt insidious, though I couldn't articulate it then. I remember feeling overwhelmed, out of my depth, and utterly helpless, trapped in a nightmare I was only beginning to comprehend. The next time I saw him was back at the Countryside Emporium. The usual light-hearted banter felt strained, a hollow echo of what it once was. A strange new awareness had settled over me, a subtle shift in my body I couldn't quite explain, but that felt undeniably significant. I felt a constant nausea, a dizzying fatigue that clung to me like a shadow. My clothes felt tighter, my breast tender, a dull ache throbbing beneath the surface. I mustered the courage to approach him by the dairy case, my voice a barely audible whisper. "Mr. Arris," I began, my gaze fixed on the gleaming floor tiles. I think something's wrong. I don't feel well. My body, it feels different." He listened, his expression unreadable, a blank canvas that offered no solace. A flicker of something, fear perhaps, or cold calculation, crossed his eyes, but it vanished quickly, like a shadow retreating into the night. He offered vague platitudes, suggesting I might just be coming down with something. He steered the conversation away, his usual gentle demeanor now tinged with a subtle urgency to escape. He looked past me, his eyes scanning the aisles as if searching for an exit. I left the store that day with a heavy heart, the unspoken truth hanging between us like an invisible, suffocating weight. From that day on, I never saw Mr. Arris at the Countryside Emporium again. His absence was a gaping hole in my routine, a silent confirmation of my burgeoning fears. The sickness intensified, the changes in my body becoming undeniable, impossible to ignore. My mother, Beatrix, observant and sharp, began to notice. Her questions, initially gentle, grew more probing, laced with a growing concern that mirrored my own burgeoning panic. The quiet whispers of our small town felt louder, their judgments sharper, even if they were only in my head. Finally, the day came when the truth could no longer be hidden. The doctor's words, delivered in a sterile, hushed tone, were a hammer blow, shattering the last fragile fragments of my innocence. Pregnant. I was pregnant. The world spun, a dizzying carousel of disbelief and dread. How could this be? How could I be pregnant? The confession to my parents was agonizing, a torrent of tears and shame. My father, Silas, a man of unwavering faith and quiet strength, looked at me with a mixture of heartbreak and a deep, profound sadness that etched lines onto his face I hadn't seen before. My mother, Beatrix, usually the picture of stoicism, wept openly, her quiet sobs tearing at my already frayed soul. When I finally, haltingly, explained about Mr. Arris, their anger was immediate, raw, and fierce. My father, though a man of peace, spoke of justice, of holding him accountable, his voice trembling with a rage that was both terrifying and comforting. They threatened legal action, their voices ringing with a protective fury I'd rarely witnessed. But where was he? He had vanished. The police were called, a whirlwind of questions and fruitless searches. No one knew his home address, his precise workplace address. He had been a ghost, a shadow, leaving no trace behind but the devastating reality of my condition. It was as if he had never truly existed, a figment of my youthful naivete. My parents, rooted in their unwavering faith, eventually conceded that pursuing him through the legal system was a dead end. Their beliefs, while offering them solace, also guided their decisions in this impossible situation. Litigation was abandoned. The pregnancy, a profound source of shame in our conservative community, had to be kept a secret. Their plan, whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors, was clear. The baby would be given up for adoption as soon as it was born. A fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to erase the painful mistake, to bury the truth and pretend it had never happened. The last months of my pregnancy were a blur of discomfort and emotional turmoil. I was confined, hidden from the curious eyes of neighbors and fellow congregants. My world, once small, now felt impossibly tiny, shrinking with each passing day, each uncomfortable flutter within me a stark reminder of my predicament. When the time came, I was taken to a hospital in a town far enough away that no one would recognize me, a place shrouded in anonymity. The delivery was arduous, a physical and emotional ordeal that left me drained and hollow, a mere husk of my former self. It was a boy. A tiny, perfect boy, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the innocence in the world. I held him for a fleeting moment, a desperate attempt to imprint his tiny features on my memory before he was whisked away. My parents, true to their word, facilitated the adoption just a few weeks later. He was gone, a silent void where a life had just been, a phantom ache in my empty arms. I was left with a scar, an invisible wound that throbbed with a persistent, heartbreaking ache. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was the insidious thread that continued to weave its way through the fabric of my life. Mr. Eris, the man who had brought such devastation, hadn't vanished completely. He had merely retreated into the shadows, a master puppeteer pulling strings from afar. He was paying someone, a quiet man named Bram, a private investigator with a penchant for lurking in the periphery, to gather information, to keep tabs on me, on the baby. The adoption, a secret I thought was mine alone, a carefully constructed illusion, was not so secret after all. And then the most unimaginable twist, a cruel irony that would twist my gut for decades. Mr. Eris, the man who had ruined my youth, spoke to his wife, Iris, about adoption. They had been trying for years, a barren landscape in their marriage, their dreams of parenthood fading with each passing month. And Iris, desperate for a child, agreed, clinging to the hope of motherhood. They adopted my son, the very child I had given away, the product of a violation I desperately wanted to forget, was now being raised by the very man who had caused it all, living under the same roof as my tormentor. It was a cosmic joke, a horrifying twist of fate I wouldn't understand for decades. Life, as it always does, marched on, indifferent to my personal tragedy. When I turned 18, the suffocating secrecy of my parents' home finally lifted. I was sent to live with my Aunt Magda in Arkansas, a formidable woman, a disciplinarian and a logistics officer in the U.S. Army. Aunt Magda's home was a stark contrast to my parents', a world of rigid schedules, spit-shine boots, and uncompromising expectations. She was tough, unyielding, but in her own way, she offered me a path to independence, a structured environment where I could rebuild. I lived with her for a year, learning to stand on my own 2 feet, to navigate a world that felt both vast and frightening, far from the sheltered confines of my childhood. After a year under Aunt Magda's strict but ultimately beneficial guidance, I finally secured my own small apartment in a bustling part of the city. It was a liberation, a chance to define myself on my own terms, to shed the skin of the past. I worked hard, piecing together a life, always with that quiet ache in my heart, a ghost of a child I barely knew, a silent shadow in my periphery. I had relationships, a handful of them, each one a hopeful journey that ended in inevitable heartbreak. The idea of marriage, of building a family, seemed to recede further and further into the distance, an elusive dream I couldn't quite grasp, tainted by the knowledge of what I'd lost. My past, though buried under layers of time and distance, cast a long shadow, a constant reminder of my stolen innocence. Then came 2020. I was 40, a woman who had seen her fair share of disappointment, but who still carried a quiet strength, a stubborn resilience. My body, surprisingly, defied my age. I was slim, tall, my skin still fresh, my features still striking, a testament to a youthful vitality that belied my inner scars. It was at a local community cleanup event that I met Ronan. He was 23, a vibrant contrast to my quiet cynicism. He was muscular, athletic, with an easy smile and a boundless energy that seemed to light up the entire park. He was a personal trainer, running a successful fitness studio that, I later learned, his adopted father had helped him establish. We clicked instantly, an undeniable spark between us, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, his youthful exuberance a refreshing counterpoint to my more measured approach to life. Within a surprisingly short time, we were cohabiting. It felt right, a natural progression, a comfort I hadn't known in years, a warmth that thawed the ice around my heart. We built a life together, a shared space filled with laughter and a quiet contentment, a fragile peace I desperately clung to. 2 years passed, then 3. We welcomed 2 beautiful children into our lives, a boy and a girl, their small hands and bright eyes filling a void I hadn't realized was still there, patching up the invisible wound left by my firstborn. In May of 2024, after years of shared joy and mutual support, we decided it was time. We would get married. The announcement to our families was met with warmth and excitement. My parents, Silas and Beatrix, now elderly, were overjoyed, their faces creased with a happiness that hadn't been fully present for so many years, a quiet triumph for them after the long shadow of my past. Ronan's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arris, were equally enthusiastic, their smiles beaming with pride. The initial conversations were typical, plans for the wedding, shared stories, the gentle weaving of 2 families together. But then, as the formal arrangements began, as details about Ronan's origins came to light, a small, insidious thread began to unravel. There were casual mentions of his adoption, of the year he was born, of the details surrounding it. My father, Silas, ever the meticulous one, with his quiet strength and keen observation, began to connect the dots, his brow furrowing in concentration as he listened to Mr. Arris speak about his son. A cold dread, a premonition, began to creep into my periphery, a sense that something truly terrible was lurking just beneath the surface of our happiness. My father, Silas, a man who rarely showed agitation, became increasingly withdrawn, his customary calm replaced by a simmering intensity. He would disappear into his study for hours, surrounded by old papers, dusty ledgers, and the soft hum of his desktop computer, conducting what I now know was his own quiet investigation, a desperate search for answers. The pieces, initially disparate and seemingly unrelated, began to click into place, forming a picture so horrifying, so utterly improbable, that it defied belief. One evening, he called my mother, Beatrix, and me into the living room while I was visiting. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't quite decipher, a palpable silence that screamed of impending disaster. His face was pale, etched with a grief and anger I had rarely witnessed, his eyes shadowed with an unspeakable pain. He held a stack of documents, his hands trembling slightly, the papers rustling like dry leaves. "Celeste," he began, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper, "I have something to tell you. Something truly terrible." My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of apprehension. I braced myself for bad news, a health concern, perhaps, or a financial crisis. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the words that followed, words that would shatter my carefully constructed world into irreparable fragments. He laid out the evidence, meticulously gathered, adoption records, dates, names, the details of Ronan's adoption, the name of his adoptive father, Mr. Arris, the very man who had vanished from my life all those years ago, the year of Ronan's birth, aligning perfectly with the year I had given birth, the location of the adoption agency, the specific circumstances, all of it laid bare in stark, undeniable truth. My past, which I had buried so deeply, was now unearthed, a grotesque corpse laid out for all to see. "Celeste," my father said, his voice barely a whisper, thick with sorrow, Ronan is your son. The child you gave up for adoption. Mr. Arris, he adopted him. He raised your son." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. The room spun, the familiar furniture blurring into an indistinguishable swirl. The comfortable world I had built with Ronan, the love we shared, the beautiful children we had together, it all crumbled into a pile of ash and dust. My own son, the man I was about to marry, the father of my children, was the baby I had given away so many years ago. And the man who orchestrated this cruel twist of fate, the man who had taken my innocence and then, unknowingly, my child, was the same man who had now become Ronan's father, my intended father-in-law. It was a macabre dance of destiny, a twisted tapestry of deceit and betrayal. My mother gasped, a guttural sound of pure anguish. a primal scream of a mother's pain. Tears streamed down her face, mirroring the silent scream that tore through my own soul, a silent, internal shriek of disbelief and horror. It was an unbearable realization, a violation on a scale I couldn't comprehend. My life, it seemed, was a carefully constructed tragedy, designed by a man I had once believed to be kind, a man who had masqueraded as a gentle soul while harboring a monstrous secret. The immediate aftermath was a blur of raw emotion. Shock, disbelief, a profound sense of betrayal. Ronan. How could I face him? How could I tell him this unspeakable truth? The weight of this secret, now revealed, was crushing, suffocating me under its immense burden. My parents, despite their ingrained beliefs in forgiveness and compassion, were resolute. This was beyond personal offense. It was a crime, a calculated act that had scarred not just me, but generations, leaving an indelible stain on our family's history. My father, Silas, his jaw set with a newfound steel, declared, "This is not about my forgiveness, Celeste. This is about justice. The law must run its course." He spoke of the years of agony, the hidden shame, the quiet suffering we had all endured, the silent burden I had carried for so long. He spoke of my ruined youth, of the life I had been denied, the stolen innocence that could never be reclaimed. And now, the ultimate irony, the man who had caused it all had, through his own twisted actions, brought my own son into my life as a lover, a partner, creating a grotesque parody of a family. The legal proceedings were swift, almost disorienting in their speed. My parents, with renewed vigor and a righteous fury, decided to sue Mr. Aris for child abuse and conspiracy. He was located, finally, after all these years, living a seemingly respectable life as an actuary, his carefully constructed facade now crumbling. His life, seemingly tranquil and unassuming, was now under intense scrutiny, his secrets dragged into the harsh light of public exposure. He tried to settle out of court, his fear palpable, a raw desperation in his eyes. He offered money, anything to avoid public exposure, to maintain the semblance of his carefully constructed life. But my father was unyielding, his resolve unshakable. The trial was a painful ordeal, every detail of that dark period in my life dragged into the harsh light of a courtroom. I had to recount everything, the innocent trust, the calculated seduction, the terrifying realization of my pregnancy, the heartbreaking adoption. My testimony was punctuated by silent tears and a voice that often cracked with emotion, each word a painful echo of a past I desperately wanted to forget. Mr. Aris, now stripped of his gentle demeanor, looked small and terrified, his facade completely shattered. His wife, Iris, sat in the gallery, her face a mask of shock and betrayal as the full extent of her husband's depravity was revealed. She, too, had been a victim of his deceit, unknowingly complicit in a heinous crime. The verdict came down like a gavel strike on my shattered life. Mr. Aris was convicted of abusing a minor and for conspiracy. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. When the news was delivered, I expected a sense of relief, a moment of triumph, a wave of vindication washing over me. But there was none. My father, Silas, sat quietly, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped with a profound weariness. "This gives me no pleasure, Celeste," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, the words a crushing weight in the silence. "Your life, it has been ruined. Ruined by a father and son, your own son." His words hung in the air, a stark and brutal truth. The man who had violated me had not only stolen my youth, but through an unfathomable twist of fate, had unwittingly brought my son back into my life in the most devastating way imaginable. Ronan, my kind, athletic Ronan, the father of my children, was my son. The love we had shared, the family we had built, was now tainted by a past I could never escape, a shadow that would forever linger over our lives. My future, once seemingly clear, stretched out before me, a landscape irrevocably altered by the echoes of a distant summer, a quiet man, and a secret that had finally, brutally, come to light, destroying everything in its wake.